All right, so you've shared these really in-depth discussions with us, and
Yeah.
what we want to do today is kind of take a look at how a particular idea, well, how an idea kind of formed for you.
Okay.
We're going to kind of deep dive into the beginnings and the current understanding of what you're calling a systemic design lab or a living systems lab,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a way to kind of do systemic design in a practical way. And everything we talk about today comes from these transcripts of your discussions.
Okay.
And it's really amazing to be able to go on this journey with you. And I have my colleague here with me as well.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to be able to witness how this idea unfolds through dialogue and
Oh,
shared thought, and just being able to see your initial questions and what
yeah.
influenced you and the methods you use to kind of navigate this complex field.
Yeah. So let's get into some of those driving forces, those initial
Great.
questions and explorations that really started this whole thing. One of the first things that I thought was really interesting was this idea of developing a physical learning lab at a campsite.
Mm-hmm.
Related to tourism like that seemed like a very concrete
It
starting point.
It did. And what's interesting is how quickly that tangible idea seemed to reach its limits in order to really dig deeper into this systemic design program in a deeper way.
Right.
It highlights that sometimes focusing too narrowly on a specific practical application
Yeah.
can prevent a broader exploration of theories and methods. So the initial idea, while grounded, revealed that maybe they needed to zoom out a bit and get a more comprehensive understanding.
Absolutely. And from that point, two main questions kind of arose.
Yeah.
One was how to learn more deeply about systemic design itself, so the kind of intellectual exploration.
Mhm.
And the second was about how to kind of develop professionally and navigate the business world. So it seemed like this intersection of understanding the concepts and figuring out how to apply them professionally was kind of key.
Precisely. And what's really compelling to see is that both of you share these fundamental questions.
Yeah.
That shared curiosity and drive for both deeper knowledge and professional application likely provided a strong foundation for your collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you both had unique roles within this master's program, as you mentioned, probably offered a really interesting,
Yeah.
maybe slightly different vantage point on the whole experience.
It definitely felt that way.
Yeah.
There was this underlying motivation, almost like wanting to kind of push the boundaries
Mm-hmm.
of what was typically done within the program.
Right.
A real curiosity to see what else was possible.
That desire to challenge assumptions and not just follow a set path is so important for innovation.
Yeah.
It suggests a really proactive approach to learning and a determination to create your own way forward.
And it's interesting to compare that with the other perspective, which was described as coming from a more practical background, almost like a black sheep,
Right. Yeah.
wanting to shake things up a little bit. There was a different initial journey with those disruptive experiences in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And that short-lived coffee project,
Mhm.
even though those were quite different experiences, they seemed to kind of spark those same
They did.
core questions.
Absolutely. Those experiences, while perhaps challenging at the time,
Yeah.
became really valuable learning opportunities when viewed through that systemic lens.
Mm-hmm.
The disruption in Tel Aviv really highlights how interconnected systems are
Yeah.
and how outside events can have such significant ripple effects.
Right.
And even the coffee project, though brief, probably provided insights into the dynamics of a small business operating within
Right.
a larger economic system.
Right. And that shared interest in the business side of things, like
Yes.
how to actually make a living from this commitment to labs, whether they're physical spaces or more conceptual frameworks, seemed like a really powerful common thread.
Exactly. This shows a real drive for practical application, a desire to move beyond just understanding theory, to creating tangible outcomes, and the emphasis on progressing through these different stages of your master's program with the explicit aim of creating business opportunities really underscores this results-oriented mindset.
And that brings us to kind of this idea of results-oriented thinking, like from the very beginning. It wasn't just abstract theorizing.
Right.
There were practical considerations, like what would a lab actually look like? What specific frameworks, processes, and tools would be useful? The focus was on how to observe and make sense of things. It was a very kind of hands-on approach to...
Exactly. That proactive and practical stance is so key. It suggests a mindset geared towards experimentation.
Yeah.
iteration, a willingness to really engage with the messy realities of real-world systems rather than just staying in the realm of abstract ideas.
And as you looked back on kind of this initial period, you started to see patterns in your journey.
Right.
It's always fascinating how those connections become clear
They do.
in hindsight. Your backgrounds in urbanism and bioregion seem to be these underlying areas of interest and potential action.
Those diverse backgrounds likely offer different but complementary ways of looking at systemic challenges and possibilities.
Right.
Urbanism, with its focus on dense, interconnected human systems, and bioregion, with its emphasis on ecological and geographically defined systems, provide really valuable and varied perspectives.
And there was this exploration of potential secondary services of a lab and this really interesting concept of professionalizing weaving.
Yeah.
Essentially recognizing the skill of connecting seemingly disparate ideas
Yes.
and making those connections.
The idea of weaving as a professional skill is particularly insightful in the context of systemic design.
Yeah.
It highlights how crucial it is to be able to see the relationships between all these different elements.
Yeah.
Identify patterns, create a coherent understanding of the system as a whole. This ability to connect the dots is essential for effective action.
Yeah. And all of this kind of led to a desire for a framework.
A way to really play with these ideas of how to apply them in practice.
Yes.
And how to actually make a living working together.
Right.
So it wasn't just about intellectual curiosity. There was a clear intention to kind of build something.
Absolutely. That intention to collaborate and to professionalize this work really sets this journey apart. It moves beyond individual learning toward the creation of a shared practice and a way to contribute professionally.
And now here's a really important point. This proactive collaboration actually started relatively late in the whole journey.
Right.
It started after a significant amount of individual learning had already happened, including that field design trip that you took.
Yes.
It wasn't the starting point. It was something that emerged after a period of a little later start to the formal collaboration.
Yeah.
Could be seen as both a challenge and an advantage. The initial individual learning provided a really solid foundation of knowledge, diverse perspectives, and then when you came together, you were able to synthesize those learnings in a more focused and informed way.
And almost immediately, these opportunities arose to kind of test these developing ideas and questions.
Right.
This Creative Bureaucracy Festival in Berlin sounds like a really intense and interesting environment.
That event acted as what you might call a forcing function.
Okay.
It required you to take your abstract questions about governance and bureaucracy and give them a concrete form. It moves the ideas from theory into practice.
Right.
Prompting a much deeper reflection on the practical role a lab could play in navigating these existing systems.
And then there was that guidance from your program director, Tobias, suggesting that you use your shared work as a way to kind of reflect during this experimental lab course offered by Moonviso.
Yeah.
So it sounds like these two events became really significant turning points.
These two events really served as external anchors, helping to shape the direction of your discussions, refine your core questions, and define the scope of your research. The Bureaucracy Festival provided a specific real-world context, while the Moonviso Lab course offered a more structured environment for deeper reflection and experimentation.
And you can see how your shared mapping, which is that visual representation of your thinking, became a way to kind of track how these key events influenced your understanding and led to even more focused questions.
Exactly. This interplay between those external opportunities and your own intentional approach to allowing ideas to emerge is a really key aspect of this journey.
Yeah.
You weren't just passively observing, you were actively seeking out and shaping situations to test and refine your thinking.
And then this brings us to the significant influence of this dark matter concept.
Okay.
It sounds like this idea of these hidden, often invisible forces that shape our actions and decisions became a really important starting point for understanding these deeper systems.
The dark matter concept and the work of dark matter labs provided a really powerful lens for examining those often unseen structures and dynamics that govern complex systems. Its alignment with the iceberg model that you'd learned in the course offered a familiar way to grasp these deeper levels of influence.
And it wasn't just a theoretical concept. It became a kind of guiding figure, almost a North Star from someone with more experience in working at a larger scale.
Absolutely. Leveraging the insights of others who are actively engaged in this field is a crucial part of professional growth. Indy Johar and Dark Matter Labs provided a real-world case study, a source of inspiration and practical ideas to consider.
And this led to exploring the dark matter itself, its potential opportunities, its kind of role as a North Star, and the question of how governance kind of operates within it. It sounds like you were trying to understand not just what it is, but how to actually engage with it and potentially influence it.
The focus on governance within dark matter is particularly significant.
Right.
It highlights a growing awareness that systemic change often requires interventions at the level of rules, regulations, and power structures. Areas that can be less visible but have a profound impact on how these systems function.
And this focus on these often overlooked areas like bureaucracy and governance led to the idea of approaching the Creative Bureaucracy Festival with a workshop.
Right.
It was a very deliberate choice to kind of address a gap in the conversation.
Yes.
Which often tends to focus more on
Right.
tangible innovations and technologies.
That demonstrates a really keen awareness of where the leverage points might be and a willingness to explore less conventional avenues for intervention. By focusing on bureaucracy and governance, you are targeting some of the foundational elements of our societal systems.
It sounds like dark matter really became a way to test how these abstract concepts and materials from your course translated into real-world situations.
It did.
It started almost as a metaphor, but it evolved into a practical...
Yes, it really acted as a bridge connecting those abstract theories of systemic design to the practical realities of trying to make a difference in these complex systems. That back and forth process of looking at Dark Matter Lab's work and then applying those ideas using your own systemic design thinking was crucial for deepening your understanding.
And seeing Indy Johar's success in actually building a business around this kind of work became a real source of inspiration. Almost like a trigger for you to start thinking about your own specific insights and how you might carve out your own niche.
It shows that this wasn't just an academic pursuit. That it had real-world potential.
And all of this ultimately led to the central question that seemed to drive your inquiry, which was, what could be the actual role of a systemic design lab in the process of system transition?
That really is the core question that your entire journey seems to be converging around. It requires taking all of your learnings, your reflections, and synthesizing them into a clear understanding of the potential contribution of a systemic design lab.
So how did you kind of tackle this big question? Well, it sounds like you made a very conscious decision to approach learning differently in this phase. Really emphasizing discussion, in-depth reading, focused writing, and truly listening to each other, meeting frequently for these very detailed conversations.
That shift in methodology reflects a deeper understanding of how we learn best, especially when it comes to these complex topics. Engaging through multiple senses, discussing reading, writing, actively listening, helps to create a much more nuanced and integrated understanding of these intricate ideas, and those frequent interactions really fostered a shared understanding and allowed for the cross-pollination of your individual insights.
And a really key part of your methodology became recording your talks. And also creating that visual board, so graphically recording your synthesis. It's like you were building both an auditory and a visual map of your evolving thoughts and connections.
Documenting your process in that way is incredibly valuable. The audio recordings capture the subtleties of your evolving understanding, while the visual board provides a spatial representation of how all of these ideas are linking together. It makes your thinking visible, allowing for ongoing reflection and refinement.
And there was this very deliberate choice to really explore the boundaries of what was possible within the program itself. It wasn't just about meeting the basic requirements. It was about actively pushing those limits and seeing what else could be discovered.
That again speaks to your proactive and perhaps slightly unconventional approach to learning. You weren't content with just following the standard curriculum. You were actively seeking out opportunities for deeper exploration and innovation.
You started with this really broad perspective after getting through the course content and the field design trip. And then you moved into these intense periods of reflection together. And it's interesting that you framed your thinking back to the specific constraints of the program at the end of this intensive period, rather than letting those constraints drive your initial exploration.
That sequence is really significant. By allowing your initial exploration to be driven by your own curiosity and the insights that you were generating. And Only then, considering the formal requirements, you likely fostered a much more authentic and meaningful learning experience.
And a really important part of kind of building your understanding involved deeply engaging with Indy Johar's podcasts and talks,
Okay.
often listening to them multiple times to really grasp the nuances and different ways of thinking that he presented. That level of engagement shows a real commitment to understanding.
It does. That deep engagement with a specific body of work really demonstrates a commitment to thoroughly understanding these complex ideas.
Right.
Listening repeatedly allows you to pick up on those subtle points and to really internalize those different ways of approaching the subject matter.
It really highlights the value of kind of focusing deeply on specific topics as a way to navigate complexity rather than trying to cover a wide range of ideas at a superficial level.
That kind of focused exploration can lead to much deeper insights and a more robust understanding of those fundamental principles at play.
So this all leads into your initial discussions about clarifying what a systemic design lab could be in the context of system transition.
Okay.
You started with some very fundamental questions about the basic setup, the difference between the concept of transformation and transition, that punk element we talked about earlier, and the overall function and benefits such a lab could offer.
Those foundational questions are absolutely essential for clearly defining the purpose and scope of your inquiry.
Yeah.
By grappling with those basic concepts, you are laying a really solid groundwork for developing a more nuanced understanding of the lab's potential role.
You then really dug into Indy Johar's idea of digitalization and bureaucracy as a key leverage point for bringing about systemic transformation. This particular idea seemed to really resonate with your thinking.
Johar's perspective on seeing digitalization and bureaucracy as potential leverage points offers a really fresh way of thinking about how to intervene in systems. It suggests that these often overlooked areas might hold significant potential for driving broader change.
And you connected this to the Three Horizons framework, seeing Horizon 3 as representing that potential future transformation, and Horizon 2, which you kind of linked to dark matter as the current systemic elements. So the institutional frameworks and governance structures where design intervention is actually possible and perhaps most impactful.
Aligning the dark matter concept with the Three Horizons framework provides a really practical way to identify potential areas for action. Horizon 2, that space to transition and emerging possibilities, becomes the focus for trying to shift that existing system towards those desired future states.
And from this initial exploration, some key concepts started to emerge as important threads in your thinking. This idea of a mindset of care, the potential of AI as an enabler for change, and the idea of the agentification of everything, which suggests a shift in how we think about agency and action within systems.
These emerging concepts really highlight some of the key aspects of this evolving landscape of systemic design. The mindset of care emphasizes the ethical considerations. The focus on AI as an enabler points to the transformative potential of technology. And the agentification of everything suggests a fundamental rethinking of how agency and action operate within these complex systems.
Now, you then brought in this concept of adjacent possibles, which are ideas that are just beyond the current state, representing near future possibilities, something you were already familiar with. And you saw its reappearance in the context of dark matter labs. It seemed like a potential way to think about moving.
The adjacent possible offers a really useful framework for understanding innovation as this exploration of those immediate next steps that are made possible by the current state of a system. It suggests a path of incremental progress within the realm of what's currently feasible.
However you felt that, it still seemed a bit too linear and designable. Too much like a predictable step-by-step process. This led you to contrast it with this idea of organic emergence, this idea that complex systems can self-organize and produce unexpected outcomes, creating a really interesting tension.
That tension between the adjacent possible and organic emergence is really crucial when thinking about systemic change, while the former suggests a more directed, intentional approach. The latter acknowledges the inherent unpredictability and self-organizing nature of complex systems, where change can arise in those unexpected ways.
You then looked at Indy Johar's kind of systemic lens, how different elements within a system kind of influence each other, using that really clear example of 3 printed houses, leading to unexpected issues with insurability. It really illustrated that interconnectedness of...
That housing example beautifully illustrates the interconnectedness within systems.
Yeah.
And how seemingly isolated innovations in one area can trigger unforeseen consequences in completely different parts of the system. It really underscores the need to take that holistic perspective in systemic design, looking beyond those immediate impacts.
This led to a more critical look at your own outcome-driven way of thinking. And a deeper appreciation for dark matter, not just as a problem, but as a rich area of potential for deeper understanding and perhaps even unexpected opportunities.
Recognizing the limitations of a purely outcome-focused approach and embracing the complexity of dark matter really demonstrates a growing sophistication in your understanding of how systemic change happens. It suggests a shift from trying to directly control outcomes to understanding and working with those underlying dynamics of the system.
You then connected dark matter back to the iceberg model, this idea of different levels of visibility in a system. And Donella Meadows' leverage points, these places where small changes can have big impacts, but you organize these ideas by different scales or fields and link them to different levels of governance. It's like you were building your own integrated map of how systems operate.
Exactly. That act of integrating these different frameworks, the iceberg model, leverage points, and governance scales really highlights this process of making sense of complex information. Developing your own unique way of analyzing systems, identifying those recurring themes and connections across those different models is a significant step in developing a deeper understanding.
And this then naturally raised the question of how these different ideas like adjacent possible organic emergence and dark matter all relate to each other.
Where do they fit in this bigger picture of systemic change? It sounds like you were trying to map out this conceptual landscape.
These are really fundamental questions about the very nature of change within complex systems. And the role that design can play exploring the relationships between these different concepts is essential for developing a coherent and effective approach to intervening in those systems.
And it led to questioning the very nature of dark matter itself. Is there such a thing as bright matter? Is dark matter always something negative to be eliminated, or could it simply be the result of not having enough information?
Those questions really push us to think more critically about the term dark matter. By considering the possibility of bright matter and whether dark matter might just represent what we don't yet understand, you're opening up the concept to a much more nuanced interpretation.
This then brought in a really fascinating connection to the world of art.
The potential value of the unknown. The feeling of awe and the element of surprise versus the desire for complete transparency and control in systems.
Introducing that artistic perspective really highlights the limitations of a purely rational, control-oriented approach to systemic change. It acknowledges the importance of creativity, intuition, and embracing a degree of uncertainty in navigating these complex situations.
And it led to that really crucial question of what does it mean to be human?
In
a world where AI is becoming increasingly capable. And there's this potential for a loss of diversity in systems. It's very timely and ethical.
That question about the very essence of being human is becoming increasingly central as technology continues to advance. The potential for AI to both empower and homogenize raises really profound societal implications that anyone working with systems needs to consider.
You saw technology as having the potential to enable bureaucracy in new ways, but also as a potential risk to human diversity and creativity, really highlighting the need for a balanced and thoughtful approach.
Yes, that nuanced view of technology is so important. It acknowledges the potential benefits while also recognizing those inherent risks. It underscores the need for thoughtful and ethical deployment of technology in ways that truly serve systemic well-being and human flourishing.
This then led to this idea of counterbalancing the influence of technology with a different understanding of human action. One that goes beyond just participating in the market and emphasizes a more creative and generative role.
That emphasis on human creativity as a vital counterbalance to the potentially homogenizing effects of technology is crucial.
Yeah.
It points towards the need to cultivate human capacities for innovation, critical thinking, and diverse forms of expression within our systems.
This brought you to really examine the distinction between transformation, which implies having a specific end goal in mind, and transition, which is more of an ongoing process where a series of smaller decisions can ultimately lead to significant change. You saw AI as a potential enabler for new ways of governing, but it raised fundamental questions about the actual goals and aims.
It did. That distinction between the how of governance, potentially enabled by AI, and the what and why of governance is absolutely essential. Technology alone can't solve our systemic challenges. It needs to be guided by clear values and a well-defined vision of what we're actually trying to achieve.
There was a real concern about the possibility of simply using technology to speed up existing problematic patterns, rather than actually creating meaningful and positive.
That's a really critical insight. Technological advancement without those fundamental shifts in our underlying values and structures of our systems risks just amplifying existing inequalities and unsustainable practices.
This highlighted the real need for wisdom in how we use technology and a clear awareness of the really significant moment in time that we're currently in.
Recognizing this as a critical juncture really underscores the urgency and importance of thoughtful and responsible action in shaping the future of our systems.
All of this led to a point of really rethinking and questioning the very framing of the lab itself. There was this growing understanding about the intensity of organic emergence that's often needed for truly deep and lasting.
This reflects a really valuable process of continuous learning and refinement. The initial concept of the lab is being challenged and adapted in light of your evolving understanding of how systemic change actually happens.
You started to see transformation as being about reaching a specific end state, whereas transition is more of an ongoing process, where a series of incremental decisions can ultimately trigger much larger transformation.
That distinction is crucial for developing realistic and actionable strategies for intervening in systems, focusing on that ongoing process of transition with its inherent potential for unexpected outcomes. Maybe a more fruitful approach than rigidly defining a specific endpoint.
There was a sense that at the moment the word transformation is used a lot.
It is.
And you started to question whether every change really constitutes a true transformation in a deeper sense. This led to a feeling of humility about the scale and complexity.
It did. The critical perspective on the perhaps overused term transformation really reflects a grounded and realistic understanding of the scale and depth of change that's often required. The emphasis on humility acknowledges those limitations of any single intervention or approach.
This humility then led to the idea that a lab might be less of a physical place or a one-time event and more of an ongoing process or a pathway for facilitating change.
Framing the lab as a process or a pathway really aligns with this understanding of systemic change. As something that unfolds over time and in those unpredictable ways. It moves away from that static model towards a more adaptive and responsive approach.
You saw transition as a process that holds more hidden potential and offers more realistic possibilities for design intervention, aligning it with that Horizon 2 we talked about earlier. It brought you back to the idea of working within the existing system to try and foster meaningful change.
That reinforces the focus on Horizon 2 as that key area for practical intervention. By working within the dynamics of the present system, you're aiming to identify and leverage those opportunities that can lead to significant shifts over time.
You then look to the laws and patterns of nature for guidance on resilience and regeneration, trying to avoid the pitfalls of linear thinking and the common hero narrative of how change.
Drawing inspiration from natural systems provides really valuable insights into how complex systems adapt, regenerate, and maintain that balance. It offers a powerful counterpoint to more simplistic linear approaches to creating change.
This led to the emergence of the butterfly metaphor as a way to understand a transformation process with distinct phases. It sounded like this image really resonated and became a powerful way for you to think about this journey.
The butterfly metaphor is so rich and evocative for understanding that transformative process with its clear stages of development and those quite radical changes that occur along the way.
You were particularly struck by that moment of fluidity in the butterfly's metamorphosis, when it's no longer a caterpillar but not yet a butterfly.
Right.
This state of having no clear fixed identity, it highlighted the potential for tension and the necessary act of letting go of old forms.
That phase of fluidity in the butterfly's metamorphosis really represents that critical stage of deconstruction and potentiality.
Right.
It underscores the need to embrace uncertainty and allow for the dissolution of old structures to make way for the new.
This offered a new lens through which to view that opportunity provided by Tobias to test your ideas in the Monviso Institute Experimental Lab course.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about thinking about labs as physical spaces anymore, but more about those underlying processes of change.
The Monviso course provided a really valuable opportunity to ground your theoretical explorations in the practical realities of those existing lab environments. That shift away from solely thinking about physical spaces towards a more process-oriented understanding of what a lab can be is a key development in your thinking.
You also started to really consider your target audience thinking beyond just sustainability departments within organizations to focus on company and business owners as the key decision makers.
Right.
This shift in focus has significant implications for how a systemic design lab might operate and what value it offers.
Identifying business owners as the primary audience really suggests a focus on demonstrating that practical value proposition of a systemic design lab.